Each year, more and more of Kentucky's tobacco land becomes infested with the Blackshank fungus, which causes a disease costing burley and dark tobacco producers between $25 and $50 million annually in damaged crops. In the next few minutes, we'll show you what Blackshank looks like, how the pathogen operates, and suggest some important practices to help you control it.
Blackshank is caused by a soil-borne fungus that attacks the roots, the stems, and occasionally even the leaves of the tobacco plant. Some of the symptoms of blackshank are quite striking, while others are more hidden. The most obvious symptoms of blackshank in burley tobacco are a sudden wilting, yellowing, and collapse, and finally death of the plant, while in a susceptible dark variety you tend to not have the yellowing, but instead have a reddish-brown, sudden wilting, dying plant. Also, you will notice that the lower root system, especially some of the major roots and the lower stem, have rotted. If you split the stem open, you should see that the stem has disc badly and also is very dark. These symptoms occur especially at any stage of growth in a highly susceptible variety, from shortly after transplanting through bloom or even up to harvest.
A less obvious blackshank symptom occurs from the root rot phase. An infected plant appears stunted, fires badly, and is likely to sun scald on hot, dry days. The roots are poorly developed, and one or more larger lateral roots may be blackened. The secondary roots will be sparse, giving the root system a rat tail look rather than the dense, abundant appearance of healthy plant roots. Black cankers will be present on the roots, and you may see extensive sloughing of the outer root layers. This phase of the disease is called hidden blackshank, and it's quite common in Kentucky, especially where resistant tobacco varieties are planted. Whether or not the blackshank fungus will damage a tobacco crop depends considerably on two things: the variety of tobacco grown and the race of the blackshank fungus itself.
There are two races of the blackshank fungus in Kentucky. Race 0 is the more common one, and it attacks all plants except those that are hybridized with the L8 hybrid, that is, those with the genes for resistance to L8. It causes its greatest damage, however, on highly susceptible varieties like Kentucky 10 and Kentucky 14. The other race that's present and is called Race 1. It's more present in southern Kentucky, close to the Tennessee line, and it attacks all varieties, including those that are hybridized with L8. However, the greatest damage will occur in standard varieties and those with L8, while the resistant varieties will still be quite tolerant to both Race 0 and Race 1.
Because there are two races of blackshank fungus in Kentucky, and because the aggressiveness of different strains of the fungus in the soil varies considerably, it's difficult to control blackshank by relying on plant resistance alone. If L8 is put into a field to stop Race 0, eventually Race 1 will replace Race 0, and the use of L8 will no longer prevent blackshank damage to the crop. In general, in fact, continuous planting of the same resistant variety in the same location causes changes in the blackshank fungus populations. They tend to gravitate toward the more aggressive race. So, to control blackshank in your crop, it takes more than just planting resistant varieties. To understand what else is involved in a blackshank control program, let's see how the blackshank fungus gets into a tobacco field in the first place.
The blackshank fungus produces large numbers of swimming spores. These spores allow the fungus to move around in water and locate the host plant, and also then will be spread rapidly in running water or any other source of water. In addition to the swimming spores, the fungus also produces large numbers of resting spores, which allow it to persist for long periods of time in the soil. And this is why the disease persists for such a long time at a site once it has been introduced.
As a consequence, anything that moves soil or water or tobacco tissues can move the blackshank fungus. If contaminated soil, water, or tobacco is carried from one location to another, the blackshank fungus is carried too. Some things that can move the fungus are obvious: rainwater, drainage, or irrigation from a contaminated pond, plants infected in the bed, or lowland flooding. In Kentucky, using borrowed infected transplants is a major cause of disease spread. But men, animals, and equipment can carry blackshank fungus as well. Cattle can move infested soil with their feet. And fumigators, discs, plows, cultivators, transplanters, tractors, and spray equipment have all been known to spread the blackshank fungus. In short, anything that transports soil, water, or infected transplants can move Blackshank disease into a clean field. So besides using resistant varieties, the second important part of a Blackshank control program is sanitation, keeping anything which might be infested with the Blackshank fungus away from tobacco beds and fields. Tobacco stalks and barn trash from Blackshank-infested fields should be burned. If you can't burn them, at least keep them on land which you know already has the Blackshank fungus. Be sure your plant bed is free of Blackshank. Use good plant bed practices. Locate the bed away from sources of infected floodwater or runoff. Use clean water for irrigation. If even one Blackshank-infected plant shows up in the bed, don't use any of the plants in that bed. Be careful not to bring Blackshank onto your farm. If you lend or borrow tools, clean them before and after you use them. If they were used in Blackshank land, wash them thoroughly and disinfect them with a Nabam solution or a solution of 10% household bleach. Probably the best way to keep infected plants off your land is to grow your own transplants. Don't bring in infected plants. Make sure your visitors don't bring infested dirt to your farm on their shoes, on equipment, or on livestock. Be especially careful around the plant bed. If your livestock is kept on Blackshank-infested land, keep them out of any clean land that you'll be using to grow tobacco. There's a third control practice for Blackshank, crop rotation. Crop rotation, especially long-term, 5 years or more is best, starves the Blackshank fungus. The longer the rotation, the better. But even a short-term rotation is helpful. No rotation system, though, will completely rid the soil of Blackshank. Once you have Blackshank, you'll probably always have it. The key is to learn to manage the disease.
The Blackshank fungus does not thrive as well in acid soils as it does in basic or neutral soils. Therefore, it's beneficial to allow the pH to drop to kill the Blackshank fungus out. However, make sure you correct the pH well in advance of the next crop. It's also beneficial to use sod crops rather than row crops in the rotation where Blackshank's a problem. The reason being is that the Blackshank fungus can build up on some row crops like corn, plus there's an awful lot of soil that's moved around the field during the cultivation of these row crops. Your best rotation for a Blackshank problem is go to a continuous sod for 3 to 5 years.
And finally, you may be able to use chemicals to help control a Blackshank problem. Ridomil 2E is now labeled for Blackshank control in burley and dark tobaccos, and you should follow application guidelines carefully. Ridomil is not recommended, however, for Blackshank-infested fields planted to highly susceptible tobacco plants, nor with L8 hybrids if race 1 Blackshank is present in the same field. Chemicals, though, can only be part of an effective Blackshank control program. In fact, if the Blackshank pressure on your tobacco land is fairly limited, using chemicals at high rates can actually reduce yields compared to untreated resistant varieties. Chemical controls are probably of most benefit when the Blackshank infestation is moderate to severe. Keeping the 4 parts of a good Blackshank control program in mind will go a long way toward preventing and controlling what's been a major disease problem for Kentucky tobacco producers. Start with good sanitation. Keep tobacco plants and soil free of any and all infected debris or water. Make sure that people, equipment, and livestock don't carry contaminated soil into clean areas. Use a long-term crop rotation plan, rotating tobacco with grasses, for example. Use resistant varieties when planting in land infested with the fungus. And where Blackshank pressure is heavy, consider using recommended chemical controls along with the resistant varieties. Keeping Blackshank down means your yields can go up. A good control program takes some planning and especially care, but it need not be expensive. For help in putting together an effective Blackshank control strategy, use the information in Extension Tobacco Blackshank publications, label guidelines on chemical treatments, your county agent's help, and most of all, a lot of good common sense.